Welcome to the AG News Show. This is our election special. We're doing the parties and the people who are not covered or reported by in mainstream media. I'm your host, Roberto Alvarez-Galloso, and the reason why we have this program is that it is very important for the American people and the world to know that there are alternatives to the Republican and the Democratic Party. And I'm inviting all alternatives to come to my program starting now, even after elections. I have with me the candidate for the Libertarian Party for governor of Florida, Hector Roos. He was kind enough to be interviewed the first time in Spanish and in English, but we're going to do it again, but this time we're going to be doing it in English. And it is about time that he talks about the state of Florida. Mr. Roos, it is our pleasure and honor to have you here a second time.
It's my honor. Thank you, Roberto, for having me on your program again. To all your listeners, thank you for your time today. It's a crucial time. The public has a right to know. When we're asked to actually participate in this Republican form of democracy that we have, there are certain rules and expectations that we all depend on. We depend on the media to give us information and good information about the people that we're being asked to vote on. We're asked about we're asked to vote on issues and prioritize issues according to the needs of society as well as our own. And reality is we're here today because there was a debate last night for Florida governor that only involved 2 out of the 4 choices that are going to be on your ballot. So the people aren't being properly informed in with respect to the Florida governor's race. And what are the main issues, priority issues that you should be aware of and concerned about? So, I started this campaign over the summer with the idea that, it's the First Amendment and the Second Amendment are under attack in Florida. We have a lot of efforts on both sides of Team R and Team D criminalizing speech, criminalizing self-defense. Florida has been governed by Republicans now for almost 20 years, and in my opinion, it's become the most hostile state to the Second Amendment, to personal gun ownership, than any state actually that's run by Republicans in the country today. Now, that doesn't mean that Florida's a bad state or Florida isn't as freer than other states. By all means, we're not playing a game here of what's better than the worst, right? We're not trying to say we're not better than the worst examples out there. We should have an expectation as members of the public, as people who are concerned and have of our own livelihoods, our ability to save and build a life here in Florida, that shouldn't have to be dependent on what's happening in another state, right? Or for the federal government for that matter. But let's get down to it. There's a couple of issues that, I'm Hector Roos again. I'm running as the Libertarian Party of Florida candidate for governor. What's a libertarian? A libertarian at the end of the day is we believe foremost in your personal liberty, that you do what you feel is best for your happiness. You do you, right? So that simply means that you are best equipped to make decisions that are about how to invest your resources, how to invest your time, and really prioritize what you think matters to you most and foremost. That's in no way should that be interpreted as selfish. In fact, the idea is that if you want to help your fellow, your neighbor, as many people want to do as part of their, either as religious devotion or because they're just nice people, right? And they want to help other people, then you basically shouldn't have to ask permission to do that. And at the end of the day, I'm a libertarian because I believe that I wholly, sincerely believe in the idea of the consent of the governed. That you are only as free as you are as you feel like you need permission to ask of others to do. So the moment that you don't think this government relationship is working for you, you can also withdraw your consent from it. And that's really the power of the individual that's enshrined in the founding of America. What makes really America the greatest nation on earth, historically speaking, is the devotion and concentration of personal freedom above the needs of a state or of a government or of really political expedience, and that's really important because today, today's day, we're really talking about politicians who have different motivations that are not you, right? And you do not have to prioritize their political ambitions because you know what, you're worth more than their political ambitions at the end of the day. So what do we have on the ballot? We have myself, Libertarian Party, third largest political party in America, third largest political party in Florida. And then you have the Democrat and a Republican, who everyone pretty much knows are either have very similar backgrounds. And what I mean by that, we're in a recession now. We have a one-term governor in Ron Desantis who's had an experience in Congress and now has basically come in and been swept into office, through the endorsement of former President Trump. And now is facing his re-election. You have the next guy who's had, again, very similar background. He just did about 6 years in Congress, and he was also the former Republican, and again, this is a Democrat. He's the former Republican governor of Florida. He was the former Republican elected commissioner of education, a former elected Republican attorney general. This is somebody who's had a very long history of politics in Florida. He's probably the oldest person in the race, and I don't hold that against him. He's got a lot of experience. He's actually probably run for governor at least 5 times at this point in his life. So, but this time is the charm. He's running for statewide office as a Democrat, and he's offering this moderate approach to, well, I don't want to say bad things about bad people, but I'm going to basically do all the same policy things that Mr. Desantis is doing over there, because I only differ with him on really these cultural quality of life issues, not the dollars and cents, not the environment, certainly not immigration, how we handle others. No difference in environmental policies, and really no difference in how in economic development. Libertarians. We see firsthand that government intervention in the marketplace causes a lot of unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. One of those unintended consequences, unfortunately, can be seen when disaster strikes. So for those hundreds of poor people who didn't get the evacuation order in time, didn't know that they were in danger, and unfortunately who passed away due to the landfall of Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida, in probably the oldest counties in the oldest state in the country. The deadliest, at this point, is expected to be the deadliest hurricane in a century. What happened? These breakdowns. Not only do we have to rely on government, especially for permission or warning when we have to evacuate, but more importantly, in the recovery, and this is very important. In the recovery, we have to acknowledge that. Because of the rules and regulations that exist in Florida, it takes years extra for communities to rebuild and recover from hurricanes. So a good example is Hurricane Michael landed in 5 years ago in the Panhandle, and they've only made about 30% reconstruction of the communities that suffered an impact over there. In Hurricane Irma, a little bit around that time too, we felt the effects here in South Florida as well. We still see entire communities of blue tarp homes or blue tarp roofs. Why? Because there simply are not enough contractors to build new roofs in Florida. There's not enough contractors to do much of any of the construction needs that are out there. And the ones that get priority, of course, are the new construction who are going to pay top dollar, who are under the gun because they're under financing. Not us who are paying or on a budget, paying as we go. Or who are on a slow payment plan from the insurance company, who gets fed first, basically. It goes. I want to point out that several reports have come out recently saying that that Florida, by the way, has a population of about 25 million people. Of that, 6 million of them identify as Hispanic, like me, like Roberto. Maybe some of you who are listening here today come from either first generation or actually are immigrants to this country, and you may not hear my voice, but I am a first generation immigrant. My family comes from Peru, and they immigrated here in the 70s, and I was a product of the Union here in the United States. But the point is that we have a culture that is supposed to be welcoming to immigrants. Come all ye, who are you're tired and
give me your tide, your port.
Masses, right? So, and unfortunately, unfortunately, we have here is there's interest in the Democrat Party and in the Republican Party to always find a scapegoat to blame. For the politicians, are always looking to blame someone for problems. Oh, inflation is caused by unborn babies. You hear that from some Democrats, or you hear, oh, the labor costs. Oh, there's not enough. There's too much. That immigrants are depressing wages for workers, and I'm like, well, how is that possible when you have so many openings and vacancies in construction work, and that is unmet in many places? What do I mean by that? So in Florida, for instance, in the construction trade, about a third of all construction trade workers are actually undocumented or let's say unauthorized to work here in Florida. We libertarians believe in the free market. I encourage most people that I talk about believe in the free market, and the movement of people to provide services, whether they're allowed to work or not allowed to work, is actually a distinct part of the free market, because it is labor costs are the sunk cost for any business. So in the construction industry, coming back to it, so we've heard a lot of saber rattling, a lot of jingoism, and certainly a lot of immigration baiting, right? People vilifying immigrants who are just trying to come here and start a new life, rather than instead being called. They're being called the people who are going to weigh down on the system, or they're going to overwhelm our social services, or they're criminals. Frankly. We hear this all the time. It makes I remember 2 years ago when, actually a little bit maybe further back, when they were talking about China and then Chinese people and how they're the next enemy, and all of a sudden you heard people being beaten on the street that look Chinese. Mm-hmm. So this is a real conversation about how people feel about their involvement in their vision of what America is and what Florida is about. Florida has three principal industries: tourism, which is very important to internationals, real estate, which invites a lot of foreign investment, and of course agriculture, which still depends a lot on laborers to work the work fields. So the immigrants actually play a very important part in the society and social fabric of Florida. And one thing I wanted to point out is, I've been talking on, but there's just so much to say on this subject.
No, go ahead.
It's passionate to me because of our background, right, Roberto?
Yeah.
And one of the things I like to challenge, I challenge the hypocrisy of Republicans who say they're pro-free market, and then turn around and say it's only free. You only support free market when it's politically convenient for you to do so. At the end of the day, one of the challenges I've given to the current governor Desantis has been this idea that he can fix or raise attention or awareness to the immigration problems in Florida or in America by singling immigrant groups out and transporting them across the country for publicity stunts. We're taking them to Martha's Vineyard, or taking them to Delaware, to where Joe Biden has his house, or dropping them in Nantucket, right? These are very exclusive enclaves of wealthy, well-to-do liberals. But at the end of the day, he has this vision of being able to do that, all for the sake of publicity. And really, I have a problem with that in the sense that you're taking real people who have suffered immensely in order to even get to this country, because they have to travel to Mexico, and they really they literally call the train that comes through Mexico, from Central America to Mexico to the northern border, the Torture Express, because in order to pass through, you have to pay. You have to pay with money. You have to be very vigilant about security, and if you are female and you don't have money, then or security, then you are at the mercies of violent predators. And I mean that in the most possible, disgusting possible imagination you can have. To that effect. The reality is that there are a lot of people who, why do people even come to the country through Mexico? It's because it's just easy. It's easier. We made it very difficult to come to this country on airplane or boat if you don't have the proper permissions. With that said, I actually ended up suing the governor over this immigrant flights or relocation program. I like to call it immigrant rendition program, because he's basically he has people convincing these people to get on planes and told they're going to go somewhere and end up not going to where they're going, and they have no idea where they're at. which is, in my book, a rendition program, because you're literally just taking somebody and you're rendering them somewhere else without their permission, really. So my lawsuit was basically targeting Governor Desantis on the basis that he never had an authorization. He's not a king or some sole sovereign of the state of Florida. He can decide how the public dollars are spent. He has to rely on the legislature to authorize any of the funding for these programs. And the legislature didn't authorize an independent program to be operating from Texas to transfer people around the country. That just never happened. So my lawsuit is very focused, like, what is your authority to do this? I'm challenging his authority. A judge just ordered my case to move forward last week. The governor was actually served yesterday on Monday. I don't know if that was why he was nervous at the podium, but I'm sure when you have to actually fess up to this one particular judge that's in Tallahassee, who also just ordered DeSantis to turn over records in a separate lawsuit. There are a lot of people who were very upset that, to the extent that he would, for the extent of publicity and to use people who are in delicate situations, to abuse of them and the courtesy of trust that they put in Americans, really, to take advantage of them for the sake of publicity to make a political point. That wasn't necessary. Libertarians, we're very tolerant of people. That's one of the highlights of our philosophy. If you're not bothering anybody, if you're not hurting them, and frankly, if you're simply not disturbing somebody else's life, you're more than welcome to take those to really live your life how you want to that tolerance. That doesn't mean we endorse your personal behavior, but it simply means that we're not going to exercise force against you, and we don't invite anybody else to do the same, to stop you from behaving how you see fit when you're not even bothering anybody, right? So it's just very basic. In other words, live and let live. So ultimately, for these immigrants, we have to really recognize that states actually do have a proper role in the immigration process. They've had a process since the beginning of the founding of this country, and they continue to have it today. Now it's become distorted because the federal government has over time come in and taken over all these portions of behavior or services that state governments used to be solely responsible for. Immigration is actually one of those. So the U.S. Constitution actually says that the role of only naturalization, that is to say, to be recognized as a citizen of the United States, is only under the purview of the federal government. It makes sense, though, right? Because you don't want a particular state to say, we'll recognize them as a citizen of our state, but and of the United States without any provisos. So it actually used to be that you would be a citizen of your own state, and the government, and in order to be, and all the states were actually sovereign states themselves. But the exercise of sovereignty means that you can reject people from actually entering through your borders. Now, typically, when we have the idea of interstate commerce, is to keep commerce regular between the states, so that there's no basically the biggest free trade zone, a real free trade zone in the world is really the United States. We don't have among the states, we don't control border access. We don't charge taxes between one state and another for entrance, and that's pretty much how it's always been. Now, but if you're coming from the external and you are in a state that is on the water or has a land border with another country, then the state was actually in charge of its own points of entry. And why do points of entry exist? It's very simple. We concentrate all services to handle the volume of people that come through in one point, and you can involve a lot of other groups. When the Irish came to the United States in big numbers, there was the Irish League, there was the Catholic Church. They would provide all of these services. And by the way, most people came by invitation. But the vast majority of them came with invitations from family, with promises of jobs and housing. Something that sounds very similar to today. Now, the federal government was not involved in any of this really until the beginning of the 20th century. That's very recent. And something called the Progressive Era came about, where they essentially adopted. They took all these programs and said, we're going to have all these points of entry everywhere, and we're going to manage all of these. And, in other words, and guess what? Because it's a regressive era, the immigration itself became the one reason why we have big government today. The number one reason why it started, this concept of a massive modern bureaucratic state, that is in the federal government, was because of immigration to handle all of these changes. Now, yes, it does mean that if states could refuse, and basically states back in the day, and not too recently in the past, would had three criteria for letting people in, right? Did they did they have resources? Were they vagabonds or not, right? Or did they have employment? In other words, and the last one, most importantly, is are they sick? How's their health, right? Because if they were sick, they would either be turned away or they would be placed in quarantine, right? That's just the reality of it. There wasn't this situation where people were how would I say this? Where people were turned away in large groups. These were case by case situations. Just simply, and it was, people were the ease of immigration, the transparency of it, the simplicity of it. Let people manage this enormous melting pot that really by the actual 20th century had already invited and welcomed hundreds of thousands, not millions of people from all over Western and Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe being, the Poles, the Germans, the Czechs, all these people that didn't speak English, right? And certainly then you obviously had French all the time and Spanish speakers, and even the Italians eventually came over in big numbers. And they all came in not through the Ellis Island, because Italians really came in earlier than that. We're talking like 1910. Now, to not get too stuck in the weeds regarding immigration, the point is that and this will be my last point about it. The points of entry, they only exist to to facilitate immigration to the point where you find there's a financial incentive for people to come through a point of entry because it's easy to access versus trying to go through the water, landing nowhere near a populated area, or through a dangerous desert where even today, thousands of people die crossing the desert to get into the United States, right? So that's really the reality of it, of why points of entry even exist. Points of entry, the biggest, Florida has a lot of great ports, right? You have Key West, you have Miami, you have Tampa, you have Cape Canaveral, you have Jacksonville. Probably the biggest port in the South is Jacksonville, actually. But that's and Fort Lauderdale. How can I forget Fort Lauderdale?
Pensacola. Pensacola.
Yeah, Pensacola on the Panhandle. Yes, that would be a great one. But they're in a different time zone, so I forget sometimes. But absolutely, those are the points that matter. And I only bring it up because it's something that people need to hear more about. That states do have a role, and it's not having this anti-human really policy or inhumane policy that the federal government pushes on everybody, that makes people wait in lines for years, keeps families separated or purposely separates them. It's basically a system that was existed to essentially to torture people, honestly, to make it so harder for people to come in here. And it's an old story, right? Because these are the outsiders that are described in the Bible. They're the people to watch out for the stranger danger, right? And the politicians also use these as scapegoats. So at the end of the day, the situation may become more complicated because the drug war, or the war on drugs, or the prohibition on commonly used substances, whether they're natural or some type of pharmaceutical. Go ahead, Roberto.
No, I just wanted to let you express everything about the Libertarian Party, and you expressed a lot that was needed to be expressed. We
don't talk about it enough in Florida. Absolutely. But I want to switch gears because I've said it on your program once before, but I'll say it again. The cost of living crisis that exists in Florida is largely man-made. It's politician-made. Whether it's from the property insurance, it's the crisis. but the state regulations have essentially destroyed, they've wiped out the entire private sector or the private industry of property insurance. There's now really one major underwriter for property insurance in the entire state, and that's Citizens. That's a public option. Mm-hmm. So we have a public monopoly dominating that area, and those are expenses that are costing people a lot of money. Because if you have a mortgage, you're required to carry it by federal standards. So the other situation is simply property taxes. People don't understand, how much property taxes have gone up and how much that's really attacked cost of living, average cost of living for people. The reason why I ask is people, why? Because constantly you see the politicians in Florida comparing, we're not as expensive as California or New York. Well, that's nice, but we're not. But Floridians don't get paid as much as they do in New York or in California. So the reality is that when more of your budget goes to just keeping a roof over your head, more and more and more. I'm a professional realtor. It's never really advisable for you to have just a housing cost to exceed 25% of your income. But people are clearly exceeding 50% in many places in Florida, and they're wondering if home ownership is something that they should just altogether give up to trying to keep. And most of this is based on speculative and arbitrary pricing mechanisms set in like property taxes. Property taxes, something that if it goes up 20%, did your income go up 20%? Just leave it like that. I mean, I don't know about you, Roberto, but property taxes, even
we're going up also. We're going up also here in Miami.
Right. But everybody's getting hit by it. So we have this thing going in Florida called the homestead exemption or Save Our Homes. And really all that is that it exists to transfer your portion of taxes onto other people who don't have those exemptions. So those other people are typically people who have second homes or who have an investment property, but most importantly, commercial property. So every time you go shopping, their property, you are paying the property tax increases of theirs. So at the end of the day, everyone is paying these increased property taxes. If the politicians are playing this shell game of who is really responsible, and ultimately, do you even know where these taxes are going? Like what services are you paying for? It's opaque. It's not clear. There's even a special tax. Property tax is paid for public schools. I'm sure you've seen this, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people complain, I don't have any kids, I'm an empty nester, why am I paying for services I'm not even using, right? And guess what? Those taxes have nothing to do with actual school services. Absolutely nothing. They get collected, they're collected and they're sent to Tallahassee, to the legislature, who then every year puts it in the general revenue and then writes a check back to every school board in the state. So, and then they determine how much services your child or your community gets in terms of public education. What do you think about that? Right? Isn't that an amazing thought? Right.
Well, nothing surprises me.
You can't see is
nothing surprises me.
Yeah, so the entire it would just be more transparent if we just got rid of property taxes altogether, because ultimately, again, property taxes go up and down based on the whim of property appraisers and how the market conditions are. Not because you sold your house or you entered into commerce. You're literally a bystander for all this commercial activity that's happening around you, and you are being charged for it. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
No, it doesn't.
Do you have any?
It doesn't make any sense. I'm listening. I'm learning from you. I'm listening to you, and I do agree with you. This from what I'm hearing, it's not making any sense.
Yeah. And it's not based on ability to pay. So if you're in your 70s, you're retired and single, and you're on maybe a pension, but definitely Social Security. Your Social Security is not really going up, and it's not. And if it does going up, it's never going up. It's faster than the property taxes are going up. In fact, for a lot of people I've met, keep in mind, for renters, for instance, especially if you're in Section 8 or your rent is doubling, right? If you're in some kind of situation, it doubles. Your income and your revenue is flat at that age. Where do you go? And you can't still stay with family because they're in the same boat. The younger families, can't really take care of the older people anymore if they never could, because they can barely take care of themselves. So we're seeing a crisis, something that was similar back in 2010, but back then we didn't have such high taxes. This year, it didn't combine with inflation either, the inflation issues. So we're really having a housing crisis, and no one's actually talking about where it's coming from. Where are all these really big thrusting costs that are coming from on this? And yes, inflation is to blame, and it could be, people can call it transient or temporary. But the reality is, I've just mentioned two things that are going up by double digits that affect directly. That is property insurance and property taxes that don't need to be so expensive ever, if they exist at all. Now, the third thing I would like to say is just energy, straight energy. So
I was about to ask.
Gas prices have come down a little bit, but electricity for your home, again, another cost of living. You cannot avoid this unless you don't turn on the AC and you don't put. I mean, that's it. I mean, now you have to actually. I think people are now thanking God that there's an early fall this year in Florida. And it's not an extra couple weeks of summer heat, but because otherwise to turn on the central air conditioning or their air conditioning units in their windows is going to be cost prohibitive. So people are having to make this decision already in this kind of climate. And again, most people are spending a double or triple, in some places even higher, for their electric bill every month. Now, of course, we have monopoly controls in this area, both whether it's FP&L or Duke Energy, depending where you are in the state, or your small electric co-op in some municipal governments that you're locked into. Now, the point is, of course, is that the libertarian philosophy here about energy, electricity, is that you should be able to decide, what kind of electricity, where you should be able to get your electricity from. You should not need to be locked into this monopoly. You should, if you have the ability to, you should be able to generate as much electricity as you want on your property as you can afford, right? So, and you should not be barred from entering into an agreement with a third party to generate electricity on your property. So, and what do I mean by that? So, there's people, the easiest thing that people do is put a solar panel up on their roof. They put in a system to handle that and even store that generated electricity or sell it back to FP&L. Now, FP&L gets to actually, influence the politicians and say, I'm going to buy that extra electricity that you just generated at pennies on the dollar. So yes, you're going to make some extra money, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to set the rate through my political influence of how much that's going to be. But more importantly, most consumers, most homeowners do not have access to solar panels, solar energy panels or systems for their home, simply for the reason that you have to, right now, according to law, you have to pay all of it up front cash. You can't finance part of it, but you can. But again, that's you having to float the entire amount. In other states and in other countries, you're allowed to actually just contract with a contract in like a lease to an installer who will lease the actual the tools, the panels, the systems, all the components. They'll lease it to you. So you only have to put out a little bit of money up front, right? And you're making more than making up for. I mean, we're in the Sunshine State. Mm-hmm. We're more than making up for the value of the lease or the cost of the lease by how much energy we're saving. And eventually, it gets all paid off. But in Florida, it's illegal to contract in that manner. And when you do. It's part of these issues that we keep having is, well, you can't run completely off the grid. You have to buy some electricity, have some access to FP&L. You're only be able to construct so many solar panels. So if you built a bigger system, you could actually go completely off the grid. A lot of homes up north, even new constructions, pretty much all new constructions in New England get built with solar panels, and they don't get as much sun as we do. And they're not. All the big home builders, whether it's Lennar or like them, they're not allowed to put solar panels on their home because they would have to sell it all in bulk, right? The entire system couldn't lease it again to the new home buyer. That's disrespectful, really.
Of course.
So you can't buy a home that's ready to go like that with these energy products. I want to say that that's only one thing of solar. But what happens if you want to run a different type of electricity, right? The idea that that's one part of solar. What happens if you want to find a different method of electricity? No, you're still required to work with the monopoly. You're still required to hook up. But functionally, even if you are part of a city or community that's on the ocean, there are many different types of power or power potentials. Right, solar was one of them because it's the most popular. It's well understood. It's been around for decades. But then there's energy sources like tidal energy, where you can put a buoy out in the ocean, and the buoy goes up and down and generates electricity from the motion. There's obviously clean nuclear these days. And people love to talk about that they're pro-environment, and whether it's a Republican or it's a Democrat. Oh, the nuclear is dangerous from them. But if it's Republican, no, nuclear is dangerous too, right? We should use fossil fuels and petrochemical products to run our business. The issue with petrochemical, functionally any cheap source of electricity makes or breaks civilizations. Let me tell you that, because if all of a sudden tomorrow gas was $50 a gallon, civilization's over. Civilization's over here in America until electricity costs go down. No one's going to be driving cars. The economy will just halt.
Like in Europe.
If gasoline was $50 a gallon, what's that?
Like in Europe.
Right. Exactly. People are limited to their commercial activities because of the mobility as a result. So the question of really this idea of energy alternatives is something that both parties resist, because I wanted to point out the main cause today of why electricity is so expensive is because all these power companies, they bet big when natural gas was cheap under Trump, and now under Biden when it's gone more expensive, their bets blow up in their face, and now they're actually charging most of their customers a rate adjustment, right? Not even part of the bill. It's an adjustment, so you have to pay for their losses. So that's unfair. I mean, the whole system is designed to put them first, and you are obligated, and if you still want to have electricity from them, to participate and pay all these extra non-service related payments.
In other words, we pay for the. Sorry to interrupt. In other words, we pay for the mistakes of the politicians and of the big corporations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No. When Republicans argue that they're pro-business, really what they mean is pro-big business. Since the lockdowns in 2010, Florida is actually one of the leading losers.
You mean 2020?
In small business. It's 2020, right? Is it 2010?
2020. Don't scare me.
2020, Florida's been since 2020, Florida has actually been among the fourth, in the top 5 of states that have lost small businesses, and we're talking about generational businesses. They'll never come back. The families just gave up, and they sold the family business, or they just couldn't afford the labor and everything. It happens. A lot of small businesses, by the way, during the lockdowns, what would happen? They would hope that was temporary, these lockdowns, and then they said, oh no, you're gonna have 50% occupancy. Oh no, you're gonna have a curfews. Oh no, what they did? A lot of them just took out more new loans actually to try and have cash flow to keep staying open during these times. Instead, a lot of them closed and just never reopened because the customers were never there. They were ordering. They're required to they were ordered to stay home, and their patterns for purchases changed. So I want to point out, inflation has been a danger. Obviously, politicians have been a danger to the economy, no doubt. And I want to point out that there is no greater example right now of politicians run amok than politicians/bankers over at the Federal Reserve approving these trillions and trillions of new dollars that are really causing these prices to soar dramatically in this recent year. I mean, ultimately, when you have politicians who can approve enormous deficit spending, with the Federal Reserve who will just print more money, and which really is just a tax on savings. So now you have this invisible tax on savings because your savings it's losing purchasing power. Your savings cannot buy what it used to be able to buy, right? And that's a tax. And I think the only solution there is really ultimately public adoption of like Bitcoin, or cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is shown to have basically a stable storage of wealth, and the first time in history that you have this idea of private money that you can participate in. It's completely democratic, no controls from governors or politicians, and that ultimately when the state of Florida, if I'm elected governor, I would implement that the state agency should start accepting Bitcoin for the sake of just maintaining our own cash flow reserves. Florida has billions of dollars that's just squirreled away for rainy day funds. And it's all put up, and our pensions for that matter too, are all at the whim of these central planning banks that determine whether what the value of your dollar is today, not the market. These people who have indiscriminate power over the wealth of how much your savings are actually worth. So the first time in history that we can actually have this kind of private money. I would get the state involved in it because I believe that ultimately public adoption will help be a check to the kind of currencies that can be manipulated, like what U.S. dollars are. But if you look on a U.S. dollar, it also says Federal Reserve Note, right? So I just want to point out that it literally does say it's as federal as Federal Express.
Yeah, Hector, I wanted to bring up the Federal Reserve Note, like you said. There was once a time, I'm talking about a long time ago, you would say Federal Reserve Note, and it would say gold certificate and silver certificate, and now it just simply says this note is worth for all the debts rendered. That, according to my interpretation, I don't know if you agree with me or not, that means we are holding debt money. Yeah.
Right. It says it right there.
Federal Reserve Note, but there's a little inscription.
Here's what you're referring to.
Yes.
Right there, which reads, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private."
Which means you're holding a debt. Which means you're holding debt paper.
Right. It's debt-based paper, which means that it's worth less than the paper it's printed on. That's literally what it means. So just by legal tender just means I decree for it to be so by law. So that's all it means.
Yep.
So there's nothing inherently backing it except the word of a politician. I promise that it's worth something, and that's really where we come down to. Exactly. That's really what legal tender means.
Besides Bitcoin, what would you, as governor of Florida, and the Libertarian Party would do concerning gold and silver? Because there has been talk about the gold standard, the silver standard.
Sure. So it's interesting. Honestly, we should allow any type of, if anybody wants to transact in any kind of money, or call gold money and transact it, create contracts in gold, they're welcome to do so. I think it's really, the point is not to have government create a restriction on what you can, what kind of store of wealth you want to keep. And again, it's store of wealth. So you can also there's also the difference between that and money that you use to transact with. Could be anything, right? You could barter either. But those are relationships. Those are free association rules. That's a separate free association rule, right? So in other words, that you are free to actually associate with whoever you want, as long as you're not hurting somebody else. Again, live and let live. Mm-hmm. So that's really the point about money. So I've said quite a bit, and at the end of the day, what I want people to recognize is that our rights come from basically what we establish. Our beliefs that we are individuals who have best interest for ourselves, and we're best equipped to make decisions for ourselves. We establish parameters everybody kind of lives to, that we call property rights, and that ultimately no other person, no other government, whether it's someone who says they're a politician or they were ordered by a politician, or a lawyer, or a judge who is just a politically influential judge.
Political appointee.
Yeah. regardless, the point is that you are free to behave without anyone coming, without the threat of violence or coercion or someone just trying to pressure you to do what they say the way they do it on their schedule for their reasons. You should be able to live your life freely the way you should, any compromise, and that's really what my campaign's about. For those who come to a value of humanity through faith, this is the application of the golden rule. If you're not a person of faith, then you simply recognize it as a virtue of your personal expression, and that's sacred to yourself. Mm-hmm. And so this is really a universal concept at the end of the day, taking a very simple idea and without trying to dress it up with the founding fathers said this or the Constitution says that. Simply being is that if you have in your vision how you want to be happy, and you're not hurting somebody else, you should be free to express those intentions freely without any interference. And everybody, we're almost at 9 o'clock. I want to just really say thank you so much, Roberto, for having me on the program. Again, I'm Hector Roos. I'm the Libertarian candidate for Florida governor. And these are the conversations that people need to have. And Roberto's doing a fantastic job having these voices on his platform. And I look forward to everybody getting a treat out of Dennis Missigoy, my personal friend, and running for U.S. Senate against Marco Rubio.
Before I leave, because I'm going to say goodbye to you later on, before I talk with Dennis, I want to say to all the world, from here in Florida, for those who are living in Florida, please go and vote. Vote for the candidate that you think is great for you. Personally, I think the Libertarians have a future in America. The Libertarians have been part of the American fabric since the days of Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was the first Libertarian. And we need Libertarians and also other parties in order to mature as a republic. We're at a point where we cannot have two parties thinking the same and doing the same thing, but with different methods of doing the same thing. We're at a crossroads. Please, when you go to the polls, exercise your conscience. Please vote for Hector Roos, and also please vote for Dennis as well. Vote Libertarian, or if not, vote your conscience. After all, Ben Franklin once said, after the Constitution was drafted, and he was asked by one of the bystanders, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And Ben Franklin replied, ma'am, we have a republic if you can keep it. Right now we have been a republic for almost more than 2 centuries. We're almost reaching the 250-year mark. I hope that we could reach that. There have been many other societies that have been republics, and because of going into the same errors that we're facing right now, they have barely survived. Venice was a republic for 1,000 years before it succumbed. San Marino, with some exceptions, is the oldest republic right now. As of this interview, San Marino is the oldest republic. It's almost about 2,000 years old, followed by Switzerland. Do we want to continue as a republic of a long standing? Or do we want to end up like some areas, some countries like Iceland, which after 300 years of being a republic, they went to becoming colonies and monarchies? We can no longer experiment. We need to vote with our brains, our logic, and Hector Roos is one of the greatest candidates. I also do have a challenge for the Libertarians. All Libertarians are invited to my program because we're going to give you big coverage that you will not get in the mainstream media, and that it is necessary for us to have a healthy republic. Otherwise, lights out on this great experiment called the United States of America. And it would be a big mistake if we were to go the way of many republics in history, like the Roman Republic, the Venetian Republic, and even the various Greek republics and republics that have existed in Italy during the Renaissance. We can't have that. Thank you, Hector. My best wishes. My best wishes to everybody, and peace in, peace out, and peace everywhere. And as in the words of Laura Marie, be love.
There you go. Thanks.
Don't go, Hector. Just wanted to wish you and thank you for everything. You're more than invited. If you have to come, if you're gonna go back, come back as a candidate for governor or president or whatever, you have my support. And I want every libertarian in the 50 states to be covered in this. If we cannot cover it in Instagram, we're gonna be covering it elsewhere. Right now, I'm gonna talk with Dennis. He left me a message, and I want to talk with him. And after we talk with him, I'm gonna get everything published this week. Please get your running mate also. He has a standing invitation.
Will do. Okay.
We have 1 week. We have 1 week at least to make a dent.